I'm hardly a scholar of the Supreme Court of the United States, but reviewing Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think that the chief reason Democrats have put so many of their hopes in her succession is not that she was a particularly powerful jurist. I'm not saying she was by any means inconsequential, but she wasn't a Scalia, she wasn't a Clarence Thomas. I think she's simply a seat of power for the Democrats that they don't want to give to Trump. I don't think anyone's that passionate about the woman herself other than the symbol that she was a Democrat appointee who was, in their minds, hopefully going to outlive Trump. And I think the rage you're seeing at her passing is not about her life or her work, but about the thought that the 2016 election has consequences, including that Trump will appoint another judge. Maybe I'm wrong? Let's go to an expert, at least certainly more expert than me, our friend Joel Pollak, Senior Editor-at-Large at Breitbart.com. I don't know if you're a Supreme Court scholar, Joel, but you're certainly a much closer follower than me. Was she a great judge, or was she just great in the minds of liberals because she was a Democrat who refused to go away?
Well, she was a brilliant lawyer. I think that's beyond dispute. She was the first, not the first, but the only woman in her class at Harvard Law School back in the 1950s, which tells you something about the kind of obstacles she faced. And she went on to graduate from Columbia and then have a very successful legal career. Much of that career involved challenging gender discrimination in American law. And she won almost every case she argued before the Supreme Court. So she was a very accomplished lawyer and a passionate advocate of women's rights. So you grant that to her. On the court, she made less of an impact. And as you suggest, she was more a reliable liberal vote than a real thought leader. She did not have the stature, for example, of an Antonin Scalia, who really defined conservative judicial philosophy for a generation, maybe two generations of conservative lawyers and legal scholars. So she wasn't important in terms of her ideas. She hasn't left us too many opinions that stand out in the mind or in the memory. But she was a reliable liberal vote, and you're correct that that's the reason many in the Democratic Party and on the left were particularly enthusiastic about her. She simply was also tenacious in a physical sense. She died at age 87. She was determined to outlast Donald Trump, and she very nearly made it, assuming if you don't assume that he's reelected. But she really had a kind of physical strength that belied her very small frame. And interestingly enough, she was also broad-minded enough to have Antonin Scalia as a close friend. So she was quite sad when he passed away 4 years ago, also during an election year. And she was critical of things like Colin Kaepernick kneeling for the anthem. She was not a fan of kneeling for the national anthem. So she represents a kind of old liberalism associated with the women's rights movement and so forth, not quite on board with the new woke thought in the Democratic Party or on the left. And she was disturbed in recent years by the increasing attacks on members of the judiciary by the left. So in that sense, she wasn't quite on board with what Democrats are trying to do. She was very much in favor of President Obama being allowed to nominate a justice in 2016, but she was against court packing, which is what the left wants to do now. This is the new scheme that the Democrats are floating to add justices to the 9-member Supreme Court. Right now it has a 5-4 conservative majority, temporarily 5-3. It could have a 6-3 conservative majority if Trump is able to put his appointee on the court. And Democrats say, well, we're going to negate your 6-3 majority. If we get power again, if Joe Biden wins the presidency and we win the Senate and we keep the House, we're going to expand the number of Supreme Court justices to 13 and then quickly confirm 4 new justices so that we have a 7-6 majority. You don't have a 6-3 majority. Yeah. So that's where things stand.
You know, you mentioned how Ruth Bader Ginsburg was against the radical identity politics of Kaepernick. I think that would come as a surprise to some of her more woke mourners today. But here's a clip of her saying that she does not want the court packed, and she fears that that would turn the court in the eyes of the public into a partisan instrument. Take a look at this.
Past the age of 70, the president would have authority to nominate another justice. If that plan had been effective, the court's number would have swelled immediately from 9 to 15, and the president would have 6 appointments to make. You mentioned before the court appearing partisan. Well, if anything would make the court appear partisan, it would be that. One side saying, when we're in power, we're going to enlarge the number of judges, so we will have more people who will vote the way we want them to. So I am not at all in favor of that solution to what I see as a temporary situation.
Very calm, speaking slowly, as you say, minute physically, but still all there mentally. It's interesting that she has a big enough view of the world that although she's a down-the-line liberal, she sees the problems with a clearly partisan trick. And I think that the fact that she was against that kind of trickery, Joel, and the Democrat Party wants that kind of trickery now, is very similar to the Democratic Party right now saying, well, we're going to have mail-in ballots, we're going to keep counting them after the official voting day, we're not going to concede no matter what. It strikes me that she's fair-minded enough a judge to see rule rigging or an attempt to change the rules by the Democrats, and she's grown up enough to blow the whistle on it. I think the calls to pack the court by the Democrats are of the same species of trickery as their mail-in voting and their other plans not to concede if they lose.
That's right. The Democrats have all kinds of ways of changing the rules when they don't win. And they should perhaps change the name of their party because they don't seem to like democracy very much. They lost the last election and still haven't gotten over it. Now, the Democrats are accusing Republicans of changing their mind about the rules because Republicans said you should not confirm a new Supreme Court justice in an election year. That was the argument Republicans used to keep Merrick Garland off the Supreme Court when Obama nominated him in the last year of his second term. But the situation there was somewhat different. You had the opposition controlling the Senate. And so these two sides, the presidency with Obama on the left and Senate with Republicans on the right, they weren't really going to see eye to eye about much of anything. And Obama had by then established such a clear preference for the left, and he had really a bad track record of ignoring the Constitution, especially on things like the Iran deal and Obamacare and so forth, DACA. I think that Senate Republicans were on firm ground. They're now being accused of hypocrisy because they want to give a vote to whoever President Trump nominates later this week. I don't know that it really matters. Democrats can also be accused of hypocrisy because, of course, they put out all kinds of statements in 2016 that the Senate has to do its duty. The Constitution doesn't say anything about presidential election years blocking justices. We've had almost 30 judges appointed or justices appointed during election years. I think there have been 29 vacancies over the last 2 centuries and a half during an election year. So this is all going to be very interesting. We don't know how it's going to go. Maybe it'll depend on who President Trump nominates. He's committed to nominating a woman. He's going to nominate one of a list of 5 right now. We don't know who exactly is on the list, but Trump has at least released 2 potential lists of candidates. Joe Biden is refusing to release a list, even though Biden said he was working on one in June. He said he was going to nominate an African-American woman to the court and that he would shortly have a list for us, and we have never seen that list.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.